So, there's the age-old question in Overwatch esports, and it's Contenders Vs Overwatch League. It's not age-old, actually, it's only about 3 years old. You know, it's as old as the Overwatch League has been. But anyway, we always have this discussion, and a lot of people debate about it. Where would certain Contenders teams find themselves if they were just implanted into the Overwatch League? Where would they find themselves in the standings? How would they do? And let's discuss that, because I think that's a really neat idea. And we could keep revisiting this at different points in Contender seasons and stuff like that, to just really give us an idea of where people stand. Because there is this idea, and I agree, that sometimes there are better teams outside of the Overwatch League than there are in the Overwatch League. Not for the entirety of the league, but there are some teams that I think could do pretty okay in the league if they were given the chance right from the bat in how they are formed right now. So, we're going to take this from the 2020 standings, or how they finished anyway, use them as power rankings, so obviously Shanghai top, Philadelphia second, San Francisco third, all the way down to London in 17th, Boston in 20th, etc. So, what we'll do is we'll take a few examples from Contenders, the last Contenders season, shall we say. I'm not going to take the Gauntlet, because the Gauntlet was influenced by player transfers into the league for 2021. So I'm going to take this from the end of their current season, so end of European season, the second Contenders season, and the end of the second Korean Contenders season, NA, etc. So, when we look at the Korean scene, that's always the big argument. Where would the Korean teams feature in the league? So, your winners from Contenders Season 2 in Korea were WGS Phoenix, World Game Star Phoenix, and the runners-up were Runaway. So, these are two very good teams, and a lot of these players have either been within a shout of the Overwatch League or have moved up to the Overwatch League now, with World Game Star Phoenix having players like I'm37 and Aztec at the time. I'm37 is now part of the Boston Uprising, Aztec is now part of the Toronto Defiant. So a lot of these players have been given a chance to prove themselves in the league in 2021, and it shows because WGS Phoenix were very, very good in Contenders Season 2, and they were actually really good in the final against Runaway, and Aztec really did stand out to me when he was taking on Runaway. So, where would WGS Phoenix have featured in the league? Well, we look at some of our lower teams in the league last season. So we look at Boston, we look at Washington, Vancouver, London, and Houston. That's your bottom 5. Now, I think WGS Phoenix, in how they looked in that Contenders Season 2, I think they would have beaten all of those teams. And not just beaten them, I think they would have pretty comfortably got past them, actually. Especially with the way the likes of London looked, to be quite honest. They were so up and down and just unorganised at times, whereas WGS Phoenix were a nice organised team, and they could really, really flex on teams. Even Runaway at times. So, I think they would have got past their teams pretty easily. So then we look at Toronto Defiant, Chengdu Hunters, Dallasville, and Atlanta Reign. That's where I'm going to stop, so that's from 15th to 12th. I still think WGS Phoenix would have got past those teams. I think it would have been closer than the previous teams that I outlined, but I still think they would have got past them. Toronto were a bit of a mix and match. Chengdu can pull off some stuff at times, and it depends on the meta. If we were in the meta that we've just been in, say it was Bull Sigma, with Echo Tracer, I think Chengdu would win. I think Chengdu would win quite easily, actually. But not at that point. I think WGS Phoenix would have been too good. Dallas had all sorts of problems towards the end of the season, so I don't think we can say that they would have beaten them. Atlanta Reign, coaching was not up to scratch for Atlanta Reign last season, and they had this player called Saucy, and they like to play him a lot, so I really don't know why. That's all I can say about that. Then we have a look at the teams above them. So, the next team is Seoul. So Seoul Dynasty, they would have beaten WGS Phoenix. I'm pretty sure of that. Yes, they were 11th in the standings, but they were our runners-up for last season. And that's because Seoul Dynasty, they weren't always great at getting the regular results, but in tournaments they really did well. And in a match against WGS Phoenix, with stuff at stake, they would do well. I really, really do think. Hangzhou Spark, I still think, would edge past them. Gladiators, Valiant, same being, remember this is Valiant from 2020, not the current Valiant. Excelsior? New York Excelsior may have a little bit of a tough time. I think it'll be a close match, but I think they'll be okay. Florida, I think, would have too much quality. Guangzhou Charge, again, it could heavily depend on meta. Guangzhou Charge fell off towards the end of the season, when the meta changed slightly. So, again, that is one that could be up for debate, but I think it'll be a close match, but they get through. Then we look at the Paris of last season, they'd be okay. The San Francisco Shock would probably storm it. So would Philadelphia of last season, and so would Shanghai, because those teams were just so good. But I still think WGS Phoenix as a team as a whole would hold its own in the Overwatch League, especially if it got some extra coaching. It could be quite a good team. We're not going to see that team as a whole in 2021, but it's a nice thought. Runaway are not as powerful as they used to be, especially back in the days of Hacksaw, etc. But they are still a really good team. And I still think, again, they hold their own. Would they do quite as well as WGS did? I think they could match them in regular season. Whether they would be able to see it out in an off season and get a decent placing, I don't know. But I still think Runaway would hold their own. So when we look at this, WGS Phoenix, Runaway, you have to say middle of the league. That's where I'm putting them right now. I'm putting them around that 10th, 11th spot, competing with the Hangzhou Spark, etc. And Seoul Dynasty is a bit of an outlier because of their performance in tournaments. So that's kind of where we look at Korea. But what happens when we take it to other regions? So let's look at China. China is an up-and-coming region right now. It's just won the gauntlet, ahead of Korea for the first time. And it is a pretty major shift in power going on in Asia. And you can see that, and it's also occurred since almost the influx of Chinese teams in the Overwatch League, when we saw Hangzhou and Guangzhou and Chengdu come in, etc. It's had a major impact on what we see in China. And there's a lot of up-and-coming talent for that team, for that country. And also, Valiant maybe being brought out by a Chinese organization with a load more Chinese influence being in the league. And it's showing with the quality of China's Overwatch play. I'm going to pick out two teams from China. So, Team CC, who have been the dominant force in China for a very long time. And then Flag Gaming, the surprise up-and-comers who beat Team CC in the Contenders Season 2 finals in China, to everyone's surprise. Flag Gaming flopped big time in the gauntlet. Team CC won the gauntlet. So, this is two teams that are not to be trifled with. Now, Flag Gaming, I don't think they would do that well. I'm not gonna lie. I think they had a lot of momentum, but they did get pretty pasted by Team CC in the winners' finals of Contenders Season 2, and then they got a narrow victory over them in the grand finals. So this was not them outclassing Team CC by any means. So I think Flag Gaming would be a bottom 5 team, if I'm honest. I don't think they've quite got the traction that some of the teams could have coming into the league. However, they'd still have a lot of quality, and they'd still have that ability to cause problems to the likes of Boston, Washington, Vancouver, London, Houston. Those of last year anyway. This year, not so much. We'd have to discuss that, and again, we don't know this year until we actually see these teams perform, which a lot of them we haven't yet. So it's going to be very interesting to see when that happens. But Team CC, that's a different ball game, because Team CC have been really good, shown a lot of quality, and been right up there in Asia with the likes of Runaway and WGS Phoenix, and they showed in the gauntlet that they can beat them all. And so we can't sleep on Team CC. Team CC have had a lot of their players picked up by Hangzhou Spark and Chengdu Hunters mainly. And there is a reason for this. They are some high quality players, especially 1987 and GAG. So it's going to be very interesting to see them in the league. If I was to put them into a rankings of what I would think they would be compared to last season's teams in the Overwatch League, I would rank them amongst the WGS Phoenix and the Runaways of this world, putting them around the middle of the league. This would put them above the only full Chinese influence in the league that is the Chengdu Hunters. Because, you know, let's be honest, Guangzhou Charge, Hangzhou Spark, they're not full Chinese. They never have been. Whereas Chengdu Hunters always have been. So that's where our Chinese benchmark is in the league, the proper benchmark anyway. So I would rate Team CC above them, and I think that's a fair shout. The difference with Team CC compared to the likes of Chengdu Hunters is they were very, very much better on the meta, if you see what I mean, whereas Chengdu Hunters seemed a little lost last season, and I think it cost them at times, although when they got into their groove in a certain meta, Chengdu Hunters were very, very good, as we knew. Team CC would certainly not be able to compete with the likes of the Shock, Dragons, Fusion. No Contenders team can. I am never going to argue that the Contenders team can compete at that level of the game. The only team you could have argued that could have was the OG Runaway that became Vancouver, and it proved that. but I don't think there's any team in Contenders right now that can compete on that level. And therefore, I don't think we can argue that. Not for a team right now. So, yeah, that's very interesting, but that was the Asia regions. Let's look at the Western regions. Let's look at North America. Let's look at Europe. So, first of all, let's take a look at Europe. And Europe is an interesting one because Europe has been heavily dominated by the British Hurricane. And this is the closest thing in 2021 we're going to see to a test of this idea. Because most of British Hurricane has been promoted to the London Spitfire for 2021, including the entire support line, tank line, and Sparker the hitscan DPS. They do have a little bit added in, and they don't have Danad, but it is as close as we're going to get to a full team promotion. So, this will be our proof of concept when it comes to 2021. It'll be interesting to look back on this video and what we thought. So, British Hurricane dominated Europe. They really, really did. Now, at the end of the 2020 Season 2 of Contenders, they did end up losing, I believe, to the Obey Alliance, which was actually a big surprise to a lot of people. And although it was Hurricane's first slip-up in a very, very, very long time, it wasn't house burning down. It wasn't the end of an era. Hurricane came back in the gauntlet and swept the entirety of Europe. Pretty much. It was pretty crazy. I think they only dropped one map, or they might have not dropped any maps. Even against Bay Alliance, they 3-0'd Bay Alliance and then 4'0'd Bay Alliance. It was brutal. And Hurricane still were stomping. And they've done this throughout, I can't explain how dominant Hurricane have been in the EU. It has been more dominant than any other region. Apart from perhaps China with Team CC. So, it is major. Major, major, major. So, where would this Hurricane team have come if they'd been able to feature in 2020? Well, I think they would have done okay. I don't think they would have been outstanding. When we look at Boston, Washington, Vancouver, London, and Houston, I think they could have beaten those teams, if I'm honest. Some of them would have been close though, but I still think they could have beaten them. Then we look at Toronto, Chengdu, and Dallas. And Atlanta. We can throw Atlanta into this. And I think sometimes this is the way up with Hurricane, and it'll be a big, big, big teller this season to see what happens. But when we look at these teams, this is where it gets a little bit less clear, because these teams I think were 50-50. It depends on the meta and how things were going. Hurricane are a great side, but Chengdu are a great side in their meta. Dallas were okay for parts of the season, although I still think Hurricane would have had the edge on them. For a lot of it. Same with Atlanta. I think Atlanta lacked a little bit of direction at times last season, so I think Hurricane could have had the benefit out of them. But also, Toronto, they would have had their moments where they would have beaten Hurricane and probably beaten them 3-1-ish. So, yeah, it's a very difficult one to tell, but I don't think Hurricane are quite on the Team CC and WGS level, although I don't think they're that far from it. So that's why I'd put them around 14th or 13th. So, yeah, that's what I would say. As for other teams in Europe, Obey Alliance could also have done very well. They had a very strong DPS line. Part of that DPS line, mainly Naga, who was a star for Obey Alliance, is now with Paris Eternal. So there's a few more stars coming from Obey Alliance that will be in the league next season. Again, there is a support to Paris Eternal, and it'll be interesting to see what they do. They won't be quite Hurricane level. They won't quite be Hurricane level in my opinion, but with the additions that Paris have made alongside those, it may just tip it over the edge. But Obey Alliance, again, would have been competing with the likes of this year's Houston and this year's London, in my opinion. Whereas this year's, British Hurricane would have been competing more with this year's Dallas and this year's Atlanta. So, yeah. And again, there was various different forms of these teams during the season. So that's something we have to take into account as well. But certainly none of these EU teams, nor the NA teams that are coming up, will be able to compete with the top 10 in my opinion, including Seoul. So yeah, that's my opinion on that. But lastly, we go to NA. Now, the team that has been kind of ripping up NA recently has been American Tornado, and they used to be Tier 2 Trauma Alert. And they did very well, won the Gauntlet, also won the Atlantic Showdown against British Hurricane very, very narrowly. And although I think American Tornado are good, and this is a team we're not going to get to see tested because none of their players really have been picked up. So that's unfortunate. But it's been American Tornado and Odyssey recently, and Odyssey got pasted pretty much by Bay Alliance in the other Atlantic Showdown. So I don't think Odyssey would do that well in the Overwatch League. I think they'd be pretty much Washington-Boston level from last season. I don't think the same case can be made for American Tornado. I think they would be much better. Again, they would be competing on a similar level to the British Hurricane, where around that Atlanta level, around that 12th spot. I think they could realistically achieve that. Again, we are basing this off of what we know. And one thing we will never get is a straight comparison. We will never see, say, the Paris Eternal take on American Tornado. Or we will never see the Los Angeles Gladiators take on British Hurricane. Because it is too much of a risk for our teams, I think. I mean, if they lost to a Contenders team, especially when you look at, say, Washington, even this year's Washington, were they to go and play O2 Blast right now, then if they lost, that would be pretty humiliating, right? And people would start saying, why didn't you pick up these players? You've just lost to them. Like, what are you doing? We're going to be trash come the start of the season. This is awful. This is a crisis. Oh my god. But it would be a massive humiliation for an OWL team to be defeated by a Contenders team. So no team in Overwatch League has taken the step to say, hey, we're going to do this and we're going to beat them, because they are always afraid of that distinct possibility, and there is always a possibility that they could lose to that Contenders team, which would make their recruitment look very, very bad. So it's never going to happen, but we can speculate, and that's what this video has been about, and I hope you like it. And if you want to make your own speculation, there is a comment section just for that. There's also a Discord for that as well, you know, in the linked in the video description. I can't talk. My voice is giving up. Oh dear. Of course, everything in the video description, along with social medias for all of my accounts and stuff like that, including Illusion, as always. But this has been an interesting video, and I'd like to revisit it at some point, especially with British Hurricane, because they're mostly coming into the league now as London Spitfire, and it'll be interesting to see how they do next season. But for now, thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you'd like to give a like, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you in the next video. See you then.